My dad is actually my uncle, and my real dad is his brother, whom my mom had an affair with. They kept this secret from me for 16 years. I decided to cut them off completely. I'm 16 years old and I've been living with my mom, 42, and dad, 39, for my whole life. But recently, I found out it was all a lie. My parents hid the truth that my dad is actually my uncle, and my real dad is his brother. They made up stories about losing family photos in a fire when I was little, but it's all untrue. I discovered the truth when I visited my cool uncle's house last week, where my parents never wanted me to go. They never liked him, but he's always been there for me. My parents did care for me, but they favored my younger sister, Riley. She's just 2 years younger than me, so I used to feel it was unfair. But I grew accustomed to it because I love Riley. My uncle kept my visit a secret because he knew I loved books. While I was browsing his library, I found a hidden photo album. I looked through it and found wedding photos of my mom. I recognized everyone except the groom, who was supposed to be my dad, but looked nothing like him. It was shocking. When my uncle returned to the room, he looked upset to see me holding the album. He tried to divert my attention by talking about the new book, but I was too intrigued. I confronted him, demanding an explanation for why he had a photo album full of pictures from my childhood and even my mom's wedding. I've been told all my life that we didn't have any old photos, so this seemed suspicious. After a lot of pushing, my uncle finally told me the truth. He warned me it wasn't his place to share, but I deserved to know. Turns out, my dad isn't really my dad. He's technically my uncle because my real dad was his brother. My mom had an affair, leading to their divorce, and I never got to meet my biological dad because he was diagnosed with a serious illness. My dad's family couldn't care for me, and joint custody wasn't an option. My mom got full custody, limiting my visits with my dad. I was around 5 or 6 years old when my biological father passed away. I have some vague memories of him, but I never really acknowledged him as my father because nobody ever told me. The only father figure I knew was my supposed dad, who turned out to be my uncle. My mom married my uncle about 20 years ago after dating throughout high school and college. Even though they'd been together for a long time, my mom resisted the idea of marriage for a while. It wasn't my uncle who pressured her, but his family. Despite his efforts to calm the situation, my mom couldn't handle the pressure and turned to his brother for support. About 4 years into their marriage, my mom began an affair with her brother-in-law. She was about to confess to my uncle, but then she found out she was pregnant with me. After my birth, she finally told my uncle, who then filed for divorce and joint custody. However, due to his illness, he wasn't granted custody, and I never got to spend much time with him as a real father. To be honest, I barely remember my biological father. A DNA test proved I was his daughter, which probably made my parents emotionally distant because I reminded them of the person they cheated on. My sister Riley was born 2 years later, and by the time I was 6, my biological dad was gone forever. That's my family for you, going to extreme lengths to hide the truth and prevent me from discovering their past mistakes. Now that I know the truth, I can't look at them the same way. All the respect and love I had for them vanished. I used to think they were distant because they adored Riley more. But it was really about me and my biological heritage. When my uncle told me everything, I broke down in tears. It felt like my world was crumbling. I'd always made excuses for my parents' lack of emotional connection, but now I realize it was true. I decided to move out and stay with my uncle for a while. I couldn't bear to be around my parents anymore, and I doubt they would have ever told me the truth themselves. It was pure luck that I found out. I wish I hadn't. My uncle agreed to get my belongings from home, and I didn't have to go back. My parents called me as soon as they found out. When I told them my plan to live with my uncle, they insisted I couldn't because they were still my parents and they loved me. They urged me to be mature about the situation and consider their feelings instead of dwelling on something from the past. It was hard to hear them preach about consideration when they had been lying to me my whole life. I might have forgiven the lies if they had been good parents, but they weren't. They always made me feel inadequate, like nothing I did would ever be enough. So I lashed out at them over the phone, calling them liars and awful parents and saying I didn't want to see them. Then I hung up and waited for my uncle to return, crying my heart out. When he came back, he looked guilty and apologized for everything. He brought my clothes, laptop, and other belongings. Since it was winter break and I didn't need my school stuff for a while, he assured me I could stay with him and take time to think about what I wanted to do next. It was clear my parents had reprimanded him for telling me the truth, but he didn't regret it. He made it clear that I could stay with him until I decided whether to go back to my parents or not. I didn't express my thoughts to him then, but I know he won't be thrilled about hosting and supporting a 16-year-old until I head off to college. Living with him until then doesn't sit well with me either, as it's clear he doesn't want me around permanently. He's just being temporarily kind. While I love my uncle, this situation isn't ideal for either of us. There's a lot to consider about the future that I didn't think about when making my decision. On the other hand, I don't want to return to my parents. Despite their attempts to mend things, I can sense their efforts are half-hearted, driven more by obligation than genuine desire. Their messages focus on practical reasons why I shouldn't stay with my uncle, rather than expressing that they miss and love me. They keep urging me to handle the situation like an adult. But it's frustrating. But hello, I'm not a grown-up at all, so how exactly am I supposed to act grown-up about this? It doesn't even make sense, and honestly, the more they call, the less inclined I feel to go back to them. On their last call, they said that I should come back because it reflects poorly on the family if a teen girl chooses to live with her uncle instead of her parents, and just makes it sound disgusting and perverted. I don't know what to do with this point, and I feel like I might be overreacting here. But again, I don't know Ida for refusing to go back to my parents once I learned that my dad isn't actually my biological dad, and he's technically my uncle, because mom cheated. Update 1. So it's been a couple of days since I posted here, and yesterday, out of frustration, I told my uncle to try and put me in touch with a lawyer so I could at least try to make sense of this mess that I was in. I don't think he'd been expecting that and looked pretty surprised when I brought it up. I couldn't keep it in anymore and ended up crying while telling him how lost I felt. I didn't even intend to cry, but I just couldn't hold the tears back anymore, and they just kept coming as I wiped them away and tried to explain how I was feeling. It had been almost 10 days since I moved in with him, but despite having him around and also having the constant attention of my parents, which I'd always wanted, I'd never felt more alone in my entire life. Yesterday, it just got too much to bear, and I broke down in front of him. Thankfully, my uncle was a lot more understanding than my parents, and he hugged me and consoled me while I was crying. And after a while, he was crying too. He told me that he tried his best not to let me in on this nasty secret, but he just couldn't do this anymore. And when my parents have found out, they've been vicious and had attacked him on every possible level. My mother especially had been the worst and had called him a weird pervert who wanted to hog my attention. That's probably the cruelest thing I've ever heard. Nobody in this family has tried to help me, least of all my parents. For them to say something so disgusting showed their true colors. They only care about themselves. I can't fathom what kind of person would say such things about their own daughter and brother. I'm sure they wouldn't care about me if it wasn't for the inconvenience of explaining my absence to their guests. They're incredibly selfish, and it's infuriating. My uncle faced consequences for telling me the truth, and I realized we truly are the black sheep of the family. I'm glad we don't fit in with them. Riley has been supportive, understanding that I don't want to go back to our parents. They never made me feel loved, and it's clear now. My uncle said I could stay with him as long as I needed, and he apologized for not making me feel welcome at first. He understands my struggle and plans to prioritize my well-being. He's even considering legal action against my mom, knowing she might try something at his expense. It's evident how low people's opinions of my parents are, and many commenters share similar sentiments. To those who say I'm overreacting, I'd like to ask if they could honestly handle being in my shoes. If they discovered the truth about their parents, would they still be okay with them? I don't think so. I've been lied to my whole life and treated unfairly, so I have every right to be angry. Update. My uncle has taken steps to legally adopt me, and I informed my parents about it. They reacted poorly, calling me ungrateful and dramatic. Despite their claims of trying their best, they hadn't even visited me since I moved out. Their excuses started pouring in, but it's clear they're more concerned about their reputation than my well-being. Their biggest achievement seems to be cheating, not considering their daughter's feelings. They've even made me doubt the validity of my anger towards years of deception, which shows how toxic their behavior is. I don't care if I seem harsh on them right now. After what they've said, they deserve it and worse. They're lucky I'm venting on a platform that still protects their privacy instead of airing their dirty laundry in public. I could name and shame them if I wanted to, but I won't stoop that low. However, if they try anything funny, I won't hesitate to do so. Riley isn't thrilled about my decision, but she respects and understands it, which is all I can ask for. She's even younger than me, so it wouldn't be fair to expect her to cope better than I am. I don't blame her for choosing to stay with our parents. It's not much of a choice when it's your only option. She's made it clear she can't see them in the same light again, but she knows she has to make the best of her circumstances. My uncle and I have given my parents about a week to decide whether they'll willingly give up their parental rights or take it to court. Voluntarily letting me stay with my uncle would be better for them, as it saves them from wasting money on a custody battle they'd likely lose since I don't want to stay with them anyway. Update. It's been a week since the last update, and 2 days ago, my parents finally terminated their rights over me. I have 2 more years until I'm no longer a minor, but I'm relieved this happened. It wasn't because my grandparents suddenly stood up for me. Instead, they visited to remind me to be grateful to my parents for taking care of me after my dad's family refused. They didn't speak to my uncle. Apparently, my grandparents had cut off contact with my uncle, but focused their attention on schooling me. According to them, I should be grateful that my mom adopted me and my dad raised me, despite my biological father being someone else. They believed my parents did it out of kindness, but I knew it was all nonsense. They only took me in to save face, knowing that if they hadn't, my biological father would have exposed their affair while he was alive. I learned all of this from my uncle, who had no reason to keep secrets anymore. I confronted my grandparents with the truth, leading to a heated argument and their departure. They threatened to make sure my mother threw me out, but their threats didn't scare me. After they left, my uncle and I were both upset from the argument, but one good thing came out of it. My grandparents forced my parents to give up their parental rights. Now, I'm in the process of being legally adopted by my uncle, which I'm fine with. The only thing I might miss is living with Riley, who texted me to say she's been forbidden from contacting me. Despite this, we're determined to stay in touch, even if it's just at school. Things will be different from now on, but I'm ready for it. From now on, at least I won't have parents who don't love me dragging me down. I can finally be myself without constantly seeking validation from them. It feels like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders, and I can finally breathe again after a long time. This feeling is worth every single tear I've shed over my horrible parents.